I'm delighted to introduce Andrew McConnell to all of you tonight. Andrew began his career covering the end of the conflict in Ireland, his home country, but then decided to sort of set out and go and bring witnesses to a number of social issues around the world. Andrew is a renowned photographer. His work has been published and exhibited internationally, and I've got a very long list of papers where your work has appeared in National Geographic magazine, Time magazine, New York Times, Guardian, and the list continues. And he's obviously an award-winning photographer. Last year you have been awarded 2 first prizes at the World Press Photo Awards and 2 National Press Photographers Awards, including the prestigious Best of Show. So it's been a real privilege, I think, for the IRC and Panos to have Andrew working with them, thanks to the generous support of ECHO and the EU Commission for Humanitarian Aid, to be part of this project that is very much aimed at capturing the reality of urban refugees around the world. And having had a preview of Andrew's work, I must say that your work has brought home the very difficult reality that many of these people live around the world very powerfully, and I'm sure you're all looking forward to seeing that. So I'll stop here and then we'll talk about the pictures as we see them. It's a pleasure to have you here tonight, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that wonderful introduction. So I'm going to present the work that I've just completed over the past 4 months. I got to visit 7 cities in 4 continents. IRC, I worked with IRC on this, and they introduced me to lots of refugees who live in cities. And so the whole reason for this project is this new phenomenon that refugees no longer flee to camps, that the old stereotypes don't really fit anymore. Over half the world's refugees now today live in cities. And so what I hope to achieve with this work is to challenge those stereotypes and hopefully present a new way of viewing refugees in the modern world. And so we'll start, and I'll take you through the pictures. We'll start with Syrian refugees in Jordan, and we'll move through the different countries and the different cities, and I'll discuss some of the stories around these people. So in Jordan, I went to North Jordan, to a small city called Mafraq, which is very close to the border. This is obviously the most topical issue at the moment in terms of refugees. At that time, there was 100 people per day crossing into Jordan. It's recently gone up to 200, I've heard. Although very, very recently, in the past few days, it's gone down to very few because of the security situation now inside southern Syria. So the regime is clamping down a lot, and there's quite a lot of unrest there, so people are actually struggling to get out now. But at that time, we had 100 a day, and people were moving into these towns along the northern border. So these two girls are cousins, and they just arrived 3 days earlier. The woman in the foreground here is actually pregnant, 8 months pregnant, I think. And they all come with, horrendous stories of persecution and witnessing extreme violence. If we move on. Let me see. This is not flicking. Should it move forward? The usual technical difficulties.
We can perhaps talk about some of the
sure.
The things that you've experienced taking these pictures, and one thing I've been wondering, looking at the pictures that you have taken, is when you started this project, what did you think you were going to find, and what did you actually find in taking these pictures? What sort of image of refugees came across for you? that perhaps was different from what you set out, you know, what you expected to find?
I guess there was no huge surprises. I mean, I found what I suspected I would find. It was people living in terrible conditions, usually in very small, cramped places. One room, you would find a family, you know, in one tiny room. And that occurred in each place. The same things repeated themselves, and the same fears of, you know, detention, of the authorities, afraid to go outside. So in those terms, there was no real surprises. They all basically suffer from the same things.
Well, let's see a few more.
So we'll move on. This is, again, a Syrian family, quite a large family, who fled from homes and were now living in this dilapidated building, which you see here on the left, which nobody was living in. It was almost uninhabitable, but they had taken it over and done some patch-up work, and there must have been maybe a dozen people living there. This is a young kid who's actually an orphan and also from Homs City. He was delivering bullets to the Free Syrian Army around the neighbourhood because he was unsuspected by the authorities. He would carry ammunition around and deliver it. And eventually his commander in the Free Syrian Army was killed and he had to leave, but he didn't want to leave. He was very proud of what he did in his job and was forced to by some relatives to go with him and to go to Jordan. These are actually two members of the Free Syrian Army. One of them was shot in the leg 2 times while they were protecting protesters in Homs again after Friday prayers. And so the man here on the left was going back to Syria the next day to continue fighting. And this man with the injured leg couldn't, basically, you know, he just couldn't wait to get better so he could go back. And it obviously, it killed him to have to stay inside Jordan like that. So from there we move on to Bujumbura, which is in Burundi, bordering Congo. And at the moment you have many Congolese refugees coming over fleeing Mai Mai and FDLR persecution. Basically any woman that you photograph, a female refugee that you photograph from Congo is highly likely to have been raped. This lady fled with her family. She was kidnapped actually from her work in one of the main towns in eastern Congo and held for a while by the Mai Mai until they paid her ransom. Her family paid a ransom for her, but she was raped while she was being held. And once she got released, she just took her whole family and they fled to Bujumbura. Bujumbura is not like other cities around the world in that it's one of the poorest countries in the world, Burundi, and I mean there's basically no street lighting whatsoever. I think one street in Bujumbura is lit up. So the nature of the pictures here are quite different. This is a registration centre for newly arrived refugees. Again, this family were attacked in their home village by the Mai Mai, and the man's daughter was, excuse me, the man's daughter and wife were raped. The Mai Mai, they do this to get supplies, and they rob the home of everything, and so they use the men to carry the stuff. They use them as porters. So he was taken away into the jungle carrying his own possessions for the Mai Mai. And more often than not, I mean, almost every time they're killed because the Mai Mai don't want them going back and telling people where they are, where their base is. He was stabbed in the leg, and the Mai Mai, who was drunk at the time, assumed he was dead and left him for dead, and he managed to escape and get back. And his family couldn't believe that they actually saw him again, and so they immediately fled to Bujumbura. And this is then going to register with the local authorities, the local government refugee agency. Again, another Congolese man who who fled the Mai Mai. I will talk more about some than others, because we'll be here all night if I go on about all of them. A family who fled actually in '96, the mother and father you see here at the front. When the Rwandans went back into Congo, the Tutsis went in to chase the Hutus, and so they had to flee because the whole of Congo was being overrun. The Hutus were trying to get away from the Tutsis. They went through checkpoints. They would be held at checkpoints, and a large group of people being held at a checkpoint, and the Tutsi militia would just pull out certain people, and they never knew why. Obviously, at the time, now we know probably they were Hutus that we were searching for, but they didn't understand why and what was happening. But people would get taken out of their group, and they would never see them again. They would hear gunshots, that sort of thing, and they made their way to the river to Lake Tanganyika and made their way across. And they'd been living there quite a long time, so all their kids here had been born inside Burundi. The older woman at the back is actually the woman's sister. I mean, I should tell you a little bit about why they're photographed in this style. The whole series is photographed at night time, and it's really what I'm really trying to do here is give a sense of how forgotten these people are in cities. Refugees are, some of the most vulnerable people in cities. When they have no legal rights, they often don't understand what rights they have, and so they're afraid to go outside. They suffer discrimination. It's hard to find employment, and so they often find themselves hidden away. And then many of the people I've photographed would, especially in places like Africa, Nairobi, were afraid to step outside their own front door, because the police will often bribe them, will throw them in detention centres, even if they have refugee status. This man is a Rwandan Hutu who spent 13 years in jail for genocide and claims to be completely innocent. It's hard to know whether he was or wasn't, but he was definitely a troubled soul, and you can see from his expression he was a lost man. And he just recently got out of prison in Rwanda and made his way to almost immediately made his way to Burundi because he was facing discrimination there. There was no way to get employment. The local people shunned him completely, but really claimed to be innocent and claimed he was never a part of genocide. In a case like that, it's really hard to know. So we moved to Bangkok. This is a Vietnamese woman who came from a town in the middle of Vietnam, and it was a Catholic town. And the people of the village had been persecuted for a long time by the government, because during the war, this town was supported the southern South Vietnam. And so eventually one day they were having a funeral for a local woman, and the local security forces attacked the funeral, and they arrested about 60 people. Others escaped and fled, so she fled. And at this moment in time, there was about 80 people living in these apartment blocks from this one town, all Catholics. So, we're really here, I'm trying to give a sense of the isolation that these people will feel coming to a foreign city like this and trying to somehow survive. Very interesting story. That this is a man very unlike any other refugee I photographed. This is the rooftop of his apartment, which is about 40 floors up. He was very, very well off refugee. A man from Pakistan who's a human rights lawyer and very well known inside Pakistan, and had represented, a Christian, but he represented a lot of Christians in blasphemy cases inside Pakistan, which are often contrived and made up by people trying to, for whatever reason, target their neighbour or get back at people, revenge for some reason, usually based no basis in reality. And so he represented a lot of people, and that made him a target for the mullahs, and he was threatened he was driven off the road at one stage with and a passenger in his car was killed. And eventually it got too much for him and he fled to Bangkok. So a completely different sort of refugee from the normal. This was a surprise, actually. This was a surprise to see someone like this. But also expressed the same fears that other people did. It wasn't able to become a part of Thai society. Very much felt marginalised, couldn't work, even though he was well off. He wasn't living in a small room somewhere. So that was a surprise.
Would you say that this element of fear is something that brings together the experiences that you've seen in all the different 8 cities, or is there other characteristics that you felt were similar to refugees in the different settings?
Well, an incredible resilience, certainly, from everybody. I mean, they'd suffered things that you and I can only imagine. I mean, but that will to survive was there in each and every one of them. That they weren't giving up. These people. I mean, this is a Congolese lady, who's in Bangkok. They'd come so far, but there was that determination in everyone to go as far as they had to go to survive. And also with all of them, there was a hope for resettlement. Everybody had this hope that they could be resettled in the Western world. That was really throughout the whole board, you would find that. Which was sad in a way because so few will get resettled, and it's such a lottery that such a small percentage will get resettled, but that's what they all cling to, that hope.
But the refugees you photographed all registered refugees. So how did you identify them? Because a lot of people do hide for very specific reasons in towns because they don't want to be found, they don't want to be identified. How easy was it to find them?
These were all people that the IRC were working with in some capacity. And so they helped me find them, because certainly for me to go there and try and start looking for refugees would be incredibly difficult. So they all had some relationship with IRC. They were registered. Well, not everyone was registered. Some had tried to get status and had failed and were going back. And so they go through this process. The first thing I found that these people would do when they get to a city is try and get UN status. Once you get your UN refugee status, then you can apply for resettlement, and that's the goal. And actually, the Vietnamese woman that you saw there, 3 weeks after I photographed her, she was being resettled to Tennessee in America. So she was one of the success stories. Well, we'll see some people actually in New York who've been resettled. But
that's very interesting, because we've done in the Humanitarian Policy Group a lot of work, a lot of research with urban refugees, and our experience is very different. Is of people that in very few cases are happy to register, want to be identified. It's a minority that wants that status, or is hoping for resettlement. Very often they hide in the towns or in search of protection, or don't really have faith in the UN registration system and in the possibility of resettlement.
Yeah, we talked about this earlier. I mean, it's perhaps it's the people that I was introduced to who are the people who are familiar to the organisations, to the humanitarian organisations, and so those are perhaps the easiest people to talk to. Certainly, there are people hidden, and I mean, what I found was that for me, they were all very, very keen to get UN status. I mean, it was the first thing from every city. They really felt that would be the first step on the road to a better life. But I understand that the UNHCR and its influence is not as great anymore. It's such a long-winded process. People will wait up to 2 years just to get UN status, just to get refugee status. And then resettlement could take another 3 years. So, I mean, if you have no income, you're living in these cities, you're so vulnerable to all sorts of things. Criminal violence, the authorities are going to detain you for nothing, you know. I mean, then to wait 5 years in a place like that can be. I can see why the UN people would turn away from it. Certainly. This is a Cambodian family. The man had tried to help. He worked for a human rights organisation. He tried to help two people who were being chased by the government, and the government then turned on him, and he had to flee. And he fled to Bangkok by himself, and then brought his family later. This is a Chinese refugee in Bangkok. He was a practitioner of Falun Gong, which is a spiritual discipline which was outlawed in China in the late 90s after being widely accepted by the authorities in China. And they started to clamp down, and I think around 3,000 people have been killed up until now by practitioners of Falun Gong. He went to jail for 3 years, to a re-education camp where they feed him with propaganda and they make him renounce his belief in this practice. And he did all that and went out, but he was a real believer, so he started to practice again and preach the truth, as he called it. You know, that people must know the truth about this. And so the authorities arrested him again and threw him back in to re-education camp for another 3 years, and he was tortured. More of this propaganda, literally trying to beat it out of him. And he got out and he left because he couldn't. He was being followed actually then, and made his way through Burma into Thailand. And his wife actually had gone before him because she also was being persecuted. This is a young man from Sri Lanka, Tamil man who was kidnapped by the authorities, and in the white van they call it, the authorities would regularly abduct people from the street in the Tamil area, and more often than not they would be killed. He was taken out to an abandoned area, an isolated area, and he was beaten and a gun was held to his head. But then an argument broke out amongst his abductors that someone had seen them take him off the street, so they left him there, and extremely fortunate not to be killed. And so immediately he, through his family, through whoever he could, he got some money together for a plane ticket to Bangkok. And many people from this region will go to Bangkok because it's very easy to enter Thailand. There's not many visa restrictions, so you can fly into Bangkok very easily. And once you're in, then your hope is that you'll somehow get by, you'll get assistance, and you'll make a better life. But that's why we went to Bangkok, and that's why you'll see so many different nationalities in Bangkok. It's not like Bujumbura where it's all Congolese. These are from the whole region. So this is Nairobi. This is an Ethiopian Oromo man from the Oromo tribe, who are the oppressed tribe now in Ethiopia. The Tigrayans control the government and control everything there. So he was accused of being part of the OLF, the Oromo Liberation Front, and he spent time in jail, was tortured, and got out and made his way to Nairobi, and then brought his family. Actually, his wife was in prison at the time, and she was allowed out to find him, and that was the deal of her release. She was to bring him within 20 days to the prison, and so she accepted and got out and just fled with her family. So this is him living in this really bleak apartment block in Eastleigh, a suburb of Nairobi, where lots of the Ethiopians and the Somalis and Eritreans live. So all these pictures are taken in Eastleigh. It's quite a dire place. This is also an Ethiopian Oromo girl. She arrived in Nairobi with her father and spent 2 nights in a guest house, and woke up one morning and her father was gone. hung about for a while and went outside to look for him and wandered the streets, and then couldn't find her way back to the guest house. And just off outside of this picture is a little Ethiopian restaurant where a woman found her outside crying and took her in. And now she works in a little restaurant, and she sleeps there, and the woman basically has given her board and for the work that she does. And she doesn't know where the guest house is anymore. She can't find her way back. I mean, kind of a very sad story, but this is, you know, you find most incredibly sad stories amongst these people. She said she's walked the streets with all her friends. Ethiopian people have tried to help her find this guest house. Can't find it. She's gone to the police. Police don't want to know, and so there she is. You know.
This is interesting because when we did the study in Nairobi, we found many Ethiopian refugees that actually disappeared, and that was one of the groups that was really in hiding, because they felt that there were mysteries in Nairobi that were after them,
Right.
And that were definitely the ones that weren't registering or declaring where they were staying in Nairobi, and they kept moving from neighborhood to neighborhood very regularly for fear of being identified and found by, you know, emissaries of Ethiopian government.
Previous.
Yes, I said, you know, when we did this research in Nairobi, we found that this was a particular group of Ethiopians that kept moving from one neighborhood to the other, you know, particularly young Ethiopian men, for fear of being identified and possibly killed in Nairobi.
The previous gentleman actually claimed that there were headhunters in Nairobi sent by the Ethiopian government.
That was a common story when we did the study 2 years ago.
Also, an Ethiopian Oromo couple had been accused of helping the OLF, had spent 2 months in a military camp, were arrested, put in this military camp. The woman had been raped, the man had been beaten. When they got out, they fled, went to Nairobi. And now this woman suffers because there's a man in the neighbourhood. She's terrified to go outside. There's a man in the neighbourhood who is Kenyan military, she claims, and wants to marry her, and has told her that she must marry him, and otherwise she'll either kill her or kill her husband. And so, what can she do? You know, I mean, a man of authority in Kenya, she has no rights. She'll go to the police won't want to know. And this is the sort of vulnerabilities that they face. And so this woman will not, neither of them will leave this is their little compound where they live. They won't leave after 5 p.m. In fact, they won't venture out at all if they don't have to. But their little kid here suffers from water on the brain, so she has to go to hospital every week for treatment. And so, I mean, it's really a really dire situation for them. So the biggest community of refugees in Nairobi is Somalis. And unofficially, over 100,000 living there. Officially registered, there's 46,000, I think, is the number.
I think even 100,000 is an underestimate.
Probably.
It's quite front.
Right. This is Little Mogadishu, they call Eastleigh, and this is the nature of this place. It's one of the few pictures I took outside on the street. In fact, this is the first frame that I made of this woman, and I only made about 4 frames because it's such a difficult place to work. Immediately, the crowd had gathered of about 30 people, and you don't really want to hang about in a place like that. So we made this picture, and her little compound, or where she's living, is just off here to the left. So she fled Mogadishu to Nairobi, fled twice, came the first time when the Ethiopians first invaded and were fighting the Islamic courts, but didn't like Nairobi, and it was more difficult in Nairobi than Mogadishu, so she went back, and then Al-Shabaab took over and she fled again. But what she's found, the situation is so difficult in Nairobi that she would rather go back to Mogadishu. But she also, her little girl is sick, actually suffers from the same condition, and she won't be able to get treatment inside Mogadishu, so that's why she stays. A Somali family from Mogadishu. So in all this, we're trying to give a sense of the isolation and the anonymity that these people feel there. I mean, again, look, this is inside their little compound. They'll rarely venture out. Hard to get access to education for their kids. And so it's about giving a sense of how much in the dark these people are.
But did you come across, I mean, one other side of, you know, the Somali experience in Italy is a number of them have actually been able to make a positive contribution to the Kenyan economy. A number of them have been able to progressively, you know, because it's very entrepreneurial, set up small businesses and progress and employ Kenyans themselves. Did you come across any of these, you know, different, more positive story of being an urban refugee?
There's a young gentleman who you'll see now who is a teacher now in Nairobi, and he's done quite well, and he's what you could call a success story. But for the most part, I didn't see too many of those people. Can't hear? Sorry. No, for the most part, I found people who were in pretty bad conditions. Although they are incredible business people, you know, the Somalis, and so within this neighbourhood of Eastleigh, they're opening up shops. There's a lot of money actually in Eastleigh. Some people say it's pirate money. Who knows where it comes from? But they're definitely entrepreneurs, and they're very astute business people. So certainly in that area, they're contributing quite a bit. I think I'll move on a bit quicker because this might take a while to get through. Otherwise, this is a gentleman who, when he was 5 years old, went to Dadaab refugee camp, which is the biggest refugee camp in the world, and this is an example of people who want to get out of camps and get to the city. And this is another reason why people are moving to cities, refugees are moving into cities, is because there's much more opportunity. There's much more potential for building a life in a city. And so he left Dadaab when he was about 18 and made his way to Nairobi and is now teaching in a school in Eastleigh. This is Eastleigh neighbourhood. So he's done well for himself, this young man. So now we're in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And so in Kuala Lumpur, it's a vast majority of refugees are from Burma. This is a Rohingya refugee who are extremely marginalised within inside Burma. He fled to Bangladesh and then worked for 6 months, and he raised £70. And he was able to buy a ticket on a boat to Thailand. He spent 10 days at sea, which he says was the most terrifying experience of his life. And they arrived in Thailand, saw land, and they thought the problems were over, but immediately on landing they were arrested by the Thai police and then sold on to traffickers, which is often what happens. The traffickers take them, and they worked for the traffickers in the forest, cutting forest for a few weeks, and then they were sold on to Malaysian traffickers. And the Malaysian traffickers they don't have any money, so the traffickers will get a phone number of a relative who lives in Malaysia and name and address, whatever it is, and they'll take these contact details and then they'll deliver them to that place, because there's so many in Malaysia that they all know someone there. And so they deliver them to that place, and then they've got to pay back. Over the coming years, however long it takes, they've got to pay back. They've got to pay for being brought there. And it's a story with lots of the Burmese family. Many of these lights represent, you know, so many refugees lived in this huge apartment block, and I sort of like the idea that these represent, you know, different little worlds inside these rooms, but majority of these would have been people who fled. One of the ideas I like to explore with this was that the first thing you see is the cityscape, and this incredible cityscape, and you maybe don't immediately see the person. And I love that idea of playing on the idea that they're invisible in these cities. The refugees are there, but you don't see them. And so this was a perfect rooftop, sort of no street light was reaching this point. And it was really a perfect scene to drop him in just there. Similarity here, this is also Burmese refugees, and this is the apartment block where they lived. Strangely enough, they had a swimming pool outside it, but it was very, very dirty, and I don't think anyone swam in there in a long time, so it's not like they were living in luxury, please. She's ethnic Karen refugee. Very interesting story. She managed to get educated, and very few of the ethnic tribes will get access to education. She managed she was really determined and managed to, through monks, to get education up to university level, and afterwards came back to her village and started to teach kids in the village. And she taught in the temple, and the authorities there don't like people congregating in large groups. And the parents one day came to see the kids getting taught and see how they were learning, and the authorities saw this, and so they went to her home. And well, to cut a long story short, they killed her mother and father, and she managed to escape and fled over the mountains on foot into Thailand, and eventually made her way through the traffickers to Malaysia. And she'd only been there 3 months. She hadn't got status. She was afraid to go outside, and we didn't know getting status. That was her, and hoping to be resettled. And so we move now to Port-au-Prince, where actually these people are not refugees, but they're displaced because of the earthquake. This is an example of urban displaced on a large scale. There's still 390,000 people displaced inside Port-au-Prince. And this is a camp, and there's over 500 camps in Port-au-Prince. Some of them are very small. This is one of the larger ones. He worked cleaning latrines in the camp, which is one of the worst jobs you can do, probably anywhere. And there's very much discriminated against and looked down upon the people who do that. They're called the Bayaku. So here you'll see some of the few pictures in this project actually taken in camps, because this is about urban people living in refugees in urban environments, but occasionally in urban environments there are camps. So this is a family living in one of these smaller camps. This girl represents, what women face in many of these places. Very vulnerable to sexual violence. After 6 months in the camp, she was raped. And this is the attacker's child. She, had no protection whatsoever. Her mother lived in a different camp for various reasons, so she was alone with another family, and had no protection, and so was open to attack. She's called Lovely, and the little boy's called Levinsky. They have great names in Haiti. But the wee boy is great, and she very much loved him. Haiti again. Such a poor country, no street lighting here. So much of the city was flattened that the people have nowhere to go. They have no ability to rebuild it. So this is New York. So we've got 3 pictures from New York. These are people who've been resettled. They are ethnic Nepalese from Bhutan, which I never knew about before, but inside Bhutan, about 300 years ago, many Nepalese moved into the country, and they settled there, and a large community built up over the years. But back in the 90s, the Bhutanese government decided they introduced a policy called One Country, One People. And they took a census, and the vast majority of people of Nepalese origin were told they had to leave. And so they were trucked out, and there were atrocities committed, many people killed, and they were trucked out and thrown into India. India didn't want to take them, so they trucked them all into just inside Nepal. Nepal didn't want to take them because it had its own problems. And so there's camps today, about 100,000, just inside Nepal, where these people live in terrible conditions. And a few years ago, the UN decided to offer people resettlement in the West. And this caused a lot of friction in the camps. People said, we can't go anywhere except back to Bhutan. And became polarized, and some people were killed. And this is a couple who accepted to be resettled. And now in New York, and this man was more or less a doctor in the camps, and in Bhutan before that, highly educated man, and he works in LaGuardia Airport, and he as a car park attendant. But their young son has just graduated and from high school, and he's got a scholarship. So all their hopes were with their son, and he's a very smart kid, and he's going to do very well. So they were very happy, actually. There's a young Iraqi man from Baghdad. They fled after things became really bad in Baghdad, I think 2004 or 5. Went to Syria and lived for about 2 years in Syria and applied to be resettled, and were one of the ones fortunate enough to be resettled. But like many people who arrive in somewhere like New York, they found it incredibly hard to get work. The IRC, when they resettle people, will give them rent for 4 months, will find them an apartment, will help them with English, really give them a good start, and to try to give them the best possible ability to succeed and make a life there. And they'll prepare CVs, they'll try and get them interviews for odd jobs and things. But they couldn't find work, this family, Ali, this guy, his family. And so they moved out to Carolina somewhere, because they knew some Iraqis out there, and they went out and worked in the fields for 2 years they spent in Carolina. But it wasn't much of a life out there, they thought, so they came back to New York and made a go of it again, and the mother and father got work, and Ali started working in a shoe shop, and now this is them, they live in Queens, and they're doing okay. And this is the last image. This is Shafiq. He's from Afghanistan. His father worked with the government and was killed by the Taliban. His mother died 6 months later because of her husband's death, Shafiq told me. His brother was then killed. He was working for an American organization as a translator and a helper, and he started to get targeted because of that. So he fled to Russia. He managed to get a visa to Russia and began studying in Russia. And eventually, it took a long time. I think he was 5 years in Russia, and he completed engineering degree, and then he was accepted for resettlement. But now he works in a jewelry store in New York, in Manhattan, and was hoping that he can, because he's quite, I think he's a very intelligent man, so he's got a good degree and he has good qualifications, you know. So he's hoping he can get a good job, an engineering job. And so that's the last picture. What we also did in this project was some video, some multimedia. We picked a selection of refugees, 5, and we made a video to go along with these pictures. These pictures are really seen in an exhibition format, and the video is something that will really complement that. So I'll show you just one of them now.
He didn't have time to decide, it's just to flee. It was either to fight or to flee, to run from that place. I left Somalia when I was 5 years old because of the ongoing civil war in the country. My parents had died, so I left with my relatives, uncles and cousins, and we set off to Dadaab refugee camp. The reason I left Dadaab is because of the insecurity that was at that time growing very big. People were being killed, some of them being forced to fight. Getting permission to leave Dadaab is not easy, especially when you want to come to a place like Nairobi. So there's some people who have been there for 20 years, no movement. You feel like you're not even at your right place. You don't carry your own identification. You can neither trace yourself back there, or you're not even a Kenyan, you're not recognized as a Kenyan. So you just find yourself in between. As a Somali, you know you're Somali. We are all proud to be Somalis, whatever that is happening there. If you go around at 5, you'll be seeing people, everybody listening to radio from BBC. So people keep listening. So that gives us some hope.
Thank you so much on this. I think these images are incredibly powerful, and it's interesting because, you know, all of your work has been shot in the dark, but actually I think it really shines a lot of light on the conditions of, you know, what you've called yourself hidden lives. I don't want to take more time from, you know, I'm sure there's many questions and a lot of interest in finding out more about your work. We only have about 35, 40 minutes. Is there any immediate question or comment, please? Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Lucy Parker, and the question I have is, when all these different refugees or people of different ethnic groups and nationalities, when they come together into a melting pot of a, say, a neighborhood, right? What do you see or hear about, and you talked about Africa, you know, about people from different tribes that in their national country are fighting each other, and then they're all they come as refugees, and they all live together. Are those people able to do that successfully, or do you hear of lots of issues being taken across the border?
I think they do it successfully. You don't hear of fighting within a city, within different groups. I mean, tribalism in Africa especially is very much localized. The tribe next door is the one that you fight with, that you're angry with for whatever reason. So a tribe from Congo will not be upset by a tribe, the Oromo people of Ethiopia, you know, so they got no differences in that respect. And most people are just trying to get by themselves. That doesn't even enter their consciousness, I think. I mean, if it came down to competing for a various resources, which are very limited, then there may be some tension, but I didn't find anything like that, no.
Hi, I think I heard you say that most people you met wanted to be resettled in the Western world. Did you not come across people who just wanted to go home?
I asked everybody, would you like to go home? And the majority of them said no. The majority wanted to be resettled in the West. That was the ultimate goal. The West was this shining light for them. Occasionally people would have accepted to go home if the situation had improved in their home, but most of them were not hopeful of that. The Burmese people were very sort of cynical about the current developments inside Burma, you know. With the media is reporting Burma is improving, but they were like, we don't see that. We don't see that as happening anytime soon. The Tamil man, he wanted to go home, from the man from Sri Lanka. But even though the situation's improved in Sri Lanka, he told me, according to his family, people are still being abducted the way he was. So he didn't have any hope of that. The Oromo people, maybe if an Oromo government comes in, they will go home. But none of these people could see an end to the problem inside their country. And so there wasn't much hope of it, no.
The Iraqi, the Afghani and the Nepalese that were resettled in New York, did you find that they were being persecuted, or had they fitted in to a degree in Western society?
Yeah, it was an interesting fact about them. I mean, so the whole concept of this project, the whole idea is that these people are forgotten, that they're invisible, that they're vulnerable in their cities. But they're the success stories. Those three are the success stories. In terms of how they see it, I mean, they believe that once they get there, all the problems are going to be over. But I photographed them in the same style because the problems aren't over once they get there. I mean, they're very much, you land in somewhere like New York, you have to try and find work, you have to try and survive. I mean, to pay your rent in New York alone. The couple that you saw there, you know, they both worked night shifts. I took that picture just before they went out. He was working in LaGuardia Airport. The wife was a nurse aide in a healthcare centre. And he told me, you know, one of them working, they wouldn't be able to survive. They wouldn't be able to afford their little apartment in Queens. And so, even though their situation definitely has improved, once they get there, they're still not out of the woods. You know, they're still very much struggling, but in a much better environment, I think.
Following on that question, it was close to what I was going to ask, is whether they go to the West and they're in New York and they've come from Somalia and dealing with the cultural differences, not like the earlier days of the great wilding west of immigrants coming during the turn of the century to the United States in the melting pot. How do they find reception in their neighborhoods, whether it was in the U.S. or any large city? You know, large city, you're lost already, even if you're come from the same country. How did they perceive how they were being welcomed by their neighbors?
They were quite happy with the reception that they had. I think the nature of somewhere like New York, it seems like every nationality under the sun is there. So they didn't feel marginalised. The Afghani man told me, you know, he felt the people there were wonderful, that they were very friendly, very kind. The Iraqi man said the same thing. People here look out for each other, he told me, that they fend for each other, you know, and he said, you know, he missed that in Iraq, that it wasn't like that there. Perhaps it's different in other cities where it's not so multicultural, but New York, they seem to fit right in. The fact that you were from anywhere, Nepal, Iraq, Afghanistan, didn't matter, because there's every nationality there, you know, so I think they felt that they adjusted quite easily.
But that's New York, and it's a huge melting pot, as you rightly say, and I'm a native New Yorker.
Okay.
I was talking really about more of the wider profiling that you had done all over the world, how they were accepted or not accepted in other cultures in terms of, are these people taking jobs from me? Are these people living off the land, and where is that money coming from to support them, and so on? It's a very complex thing when you're an immigrant, as I'm sure you very sensitively have reflected in your stunning images.
Mm-hmm. So you mean more from the Native Americans? Not the Native Americans, the Americans?
No, I'm not just the United States. If they're going to
You mean in any
Nairobi,
city?
if they're going
Right,
in other
right, any city, okay.
cities, you know, Nairobi is a hell of a city, as we know.
Sure. No, the fear was not from the local people. The local people weren't so negative towards them. It was the authorities. They're very much scared of the police and any sort of authority there, because even if they had UN status, it didn't automatically mean you were immune from detention.
There's great
Especially
confusion about the legal papers, and the UN status doesn't mean anything in Nairobi, that's why.
And they don't understand their legal rights. Nobody is there to explain that to them. UNHCR try, IRC have. When I was in Nairobi, I think about over 100 people over a weekend were arrested, Somalis. And IRC was helping them with legal representation. A lawyer was there to try and plead their case. But these things would happen quite often, regularly, that whole groups would be just swept off the streets. Nairobi's situation was difficult because Al-Shabaab are operating there, and then there's been attacks, and so this was becoming more and more common. But in Asia, you would find the Chinese man would say, you know, I get on fine here. Maybe because I look a lot like the Thai people, they don't bother me too much. The Congolese woman, she probably had more issues. She didn't like it too much. She didn't like where she was. In terms of just the local culture, it was completely alien to her, you know, and the food and everything. So, but she lived in an apartment block, and she shared a room with a woman from Cameroon who also fled for different reasons. And there was Pakistanis next door who would help her because she was really struggling. She had nothing, and Pakistani people next door would help her with food and stuff. So my experience, what I found was the local populations weren't antagonistic or weren't overly negative towards them.
Those were some absolutely beautiful images, and
Thank you.
really, really stunning, and a very different perspective as well. I just wondered on the technical side how you managed to get the light on the subject and to get all the background light so clearly. And secondly, kind of how much time you spent with everyone and getting to know their story, and how did they feel about being photographed and being photographed in that particular way?
The lighting was quite simple. It was one or two flash guns, but with the light quite tightly directed so that it didn't spill out, and because the whole idea was to isolate them. And it played over in many sort of ways that they're highlighted in the darkness. And then there's obviously the metaphor of the darkness. Their lives are quite dark. They're living through this one long night. I love the way it played on subtle levels, you know. I mean, it's quite simplistic in its concept, but it works on deeper levels. So no, I mean, it was done with a tripod, a long exposure, a little bit of flash to bring out the person, and then you would let the exposure would run to bring in the city. So that's how it was done. It was quite simple. I didn't spend as much time as I would have liked with the people. The nature of the project, I had to jump from place to place quite quickly. Bangkok, I spent 10 days in Bangkok, photographed 7 people. So I would have met them all at the beginning, got down with them and explained the project, the idea, and completely left it open to them whether or not they wanted to be a part of it. We never wanted to force anybody to be photographed if they didn't want to be, especially if they were. Some people didn't want their names to be used, but they were happy to be photographed. Some people refused because they were worried about if they went home. The man from Afghanistan was worried. He still has family in Afghanistan, so we left out, because all of these people have stories, testimonies, alongside the portraits, because that's how I really want them to be seen. The story is a channel into their life and their story. And so with the Afghani man, we left out some of the details about what his father did and the rest of his family. Most people I spent a day with, each individual or group. I would spend a day with them, went to their home, interviewed them, had a look around, and then that evening took their picture.
Gentlemen.
Hi, my name is Ganesh. I've got 3 questions for you. Normally when you're on location, not necessarily things happen as you have planned. So it might consequently frustrate you. How do you manage that frustration? That's my first question. And the second one is, once you have got to hear about these emotional stories, I would be totally blind, like I saw in your picture, like you wanted to hide the refugees by using the magnificent skylines, etc. That wouldn't come up in my mind once I'm totally emotional. So how do you manage it? And secondly, once you finish the project and seminars happen, and then where does this lead to regarding your project? Thank you.
The first question, yes, it can be frustrating sometimes if you don't find a location that works, and some pictures didn't work, and some pictures had to be dropped because they just didn't work. Probably locations weren't right. Bujumbura, where there's no street lighting. I mean, I arrived there and I thought, how am I going to make this urban? This is about urban refugees. You have to try and visualize that, and so it presented problems. But then you stumble across other things that work, and like the registration centre in Bujumbura, which was nice, to show that these places exist in cities. It doesn't always have to be a cityscape. The one with the swimming pool from Kuala Lumpur, I mean, I was taking them to somewhere else to photograph, which wasn't a great place, and we walked past that swimming pool and I thought, this is really nice actually, let's stop here. And those serendipitous moments are really great, and it happened a few times. And so the important thing is just to continue and just keep working at it, and at the end, hopefully it'll come together. The emotional side of things, I think, the stories, some of them are horrendous and then really shocking, and you can't not be affected by it. But you take the story and then you just get on with taking the picture. You don't let that affect you. I mean, you're there to make an image that will be visually unique and stunning enough to draw people in, that they'll want to then read that story. And so you have to think of that. I mean, I got to think, when I continuously heard all these stories and all these things that you can't even imagine, I think I just come to the conclusion that these pictures are an avenue to the stories, and that I would want the people really to read the stories, because the stories are where the power is. Pictures are just a route to that. The third question, afterwards. Well, we've got big plans for this. We hope it's going to be exhibited many places. We've got multimedia, we've got so many different facets that we hope there's real depth there, and it can really give a good level of understanding to a viewer. And really, that's the whole point of this, to get across how these people have to live, and that these people are there. And this is a new phenomenon. This is something that's only going to continue, and refugees are just going to continue to go to cities in bigger and bigger numbers. The percentage now is 50%, but 10 years from now it could be much more. So if we can raise awareness about that and change the whole stereotype of refugees, then we'll have done something worthwhile. I hope. Okay.
And to add to that, I think is very important that obviously this work has been funded by the EU Commission, because it is a recognition that this is becoming a challenge that we're facing more and more. I mean, displacement doesn't happen in camps anymore. You know, it's predicated in urban centers more and more. We have a refugee policy that was finally, you know, an urban refugee policy was finally approved in 2009, endorsed by UNHCR, but we're still struggling to see the implementation of this policy. But I think it's work like, you know, the one of Andrew that can really bring a wider awareness also with the public about the kind of challenges that refugees face in towns all over the world, including in London, and start, as you say, start changing some of the stereotypes about these people, and you know, act as a reminder of what is behind the refugee, and you know what they carry with them when they arrive in a city. The other questions I've seen.
Hi, my name's Olivia Warren. I work with Sudanese asylum seekers and refugees in the UK. To me, there was a slight gap between the scenario that's being depicted in very tough circumstances in cities like Nairobi or in Burundi, and then the sort of end result, if you like, of a couple being in New York, yes, living in difficult circumstances, but bringing up a child and in work and with a roof over their heads. The people that we work with are sort of in a bit more of an in-between situation. I mean, they're in safety here if they've got status. Many of them are waiting for status. But they're often young men who don't have their families around them. They don't necessarily have very good English. They're sent to cities in the UK that, you know, many of us wouldn't find particularly aspirational. So they're living in sort of still fairly tough circumstances. They're obviously mixing within their own communities, but they don't have their families here. I mean, to be a couple and bringing up a child and at least seeing them going on to the next stage, as you experienced with that couple in New York, you know, there's a deep satisfaction in that, even if you're having to do night shifts. So I'm just interested whether, you know, that was a sort of conscious decision to go from KL to the, as I say, sort of slightly success story of New York. To me, there's a bit of a gap there as to what happens to many people in between who are in safety, but I wouldn't say sort of terribly happy. And in terms of the question somebody asked earlier, would they rather go home? I mean, if your family's still at home, then yes, you know, you would much rather be at home, because until you're married with kids, your future is, I think, in a Western country is still very uncertain if you can't get work. So I suppose my question is, you know, did that happen by mistake or on purpose, that sort of scenario for you hasn't been represented?
It actually, we hope to represent it, because London is still somewhere we hope to shoot.
Sorry, it's not London, it's sort of Sheffield.
Right.
And you know, Glasgow and places that are tough
Exactly,
to be in Britain.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean London. I mean, the UK is somewhere we hope to shoot.
Okay.
And so this actually isn't finished. It is 90% finished, but we're hoping to find some people here to shoot, because we do want to represent that, yes, certainly. And I've been talking to a Sudanese lady, and possibly we'll photograph that. There are other considerations. People are quite sensitive here about it, and we want to find someone who's comfortable to do this. So I hope by the time we hope to exhibit this in January in St Pancras Station, and by the time that comes around, I hope we'll have some people from the UK, not from the UK, but in the UK, and we can represent that side.
Sort of side of the story.
Certainly, that's something that I've thought about, and that we want to do. Yes.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you for showing us the pictures. They were wonderful.
Thanks.
Any other question or comment? Yes.
Hi. Is this working? Basically, I wanted to congratulate you first, because it's refreshing, because it's very humanizing to see these images. I think there's a kind of a sort of state-sponsored dehumanizing of refugees with sort of privatization of detention centres, things like that. So it was really refreshing, although I missed most of it. But I'd like to ask you if you'd, in your sort of future plans, like the two people at the front asked you, are you planning to use this to lobby on a political level, or is it principally artistic to sort of draw people in to kind of read the stories and see that refugees are also human, and you know, they have stories and feelings and aspirations? So that was the question.
Well, thank you. No, certainly we hope that this can be used for lobbying. We hope it can be we've got big plans. I mean, it's going to go first in St Pancras, which is 4 million people a day pass through St Pancras. So, which is why I think photography should be displayed. It's not in galleries where you might get 50 people in a day, you know, and a certain where you're preaching to the converted. This is where we can reach the general public in a really quite a large capacity. We hope it'll go to the UN in New York. It's going to go to Brussels. I mean, the ECHO, the EU, has funded this, and they're very keen to promote it as much as possible. Geneva, also other countries in Europe now are showing interest, so there's going to be a website completely dedicated to it. We have video to go along with it, so I think we've covered a lot of bases, and in terms of anything I've worked in, I never worked in anything on this scale and the magnitude of what we can do with this and the reach it will have. And many publications have shown an interest, and so all over the world. So it's gonna be released very soon. So I'll have never worked on a project that's had so much attention and it will reach so many people. So I hope definitely that it can affect some sort of change, and certainly in changing perception of refugees. I mean, a lot of the reason that they're photographed like this is to treat the refugee as an individual rather than a subject. I mean, there's so much imagery of poverty and people in dire circumstances, you know, from all sorts of areas like conflict. You know, I mean, imagery has been. It feels like photojournalism, especially. It's just lots of imagery gets repeated and repeated, and people are often subjects. They're not treated as individuals. They're just subject matter. And so I hope that through this we could do something that's very respectful of the individual. And that's why you take the testimonies, give them, it's about them, it's all about their story. And that's what I hope to achieve with it.
Gentlemen.
Just a quick question. I'm wondering, as you had this concept of invisibility, to what extent, if at all, were any of the images staged? And was that an issue for you?
Well, they're all staged. I mean, every one of them, you know, there was no other way to do this. I mean, to me, it wasn't a problem. I mean, that's the nature of this. They're portraits. So most people were photographed in their own homes. Some would have been taken to another area, which worked, and if they were comfortable to go, only if they were comfortable, like the man on the rooftop. And no, so I mean, this is all staged, but it's all for a purpose. It's all to bring it home as direct and as aesthetically pleasing and as captivating a way as possible, you know, because how else will you reach people if you don't do that? I think the aesthetic is very important, and so in terms of the contrast you have with reportage, where you're waiting for this moment to happen, and you know, you cannot interfere with the moment. This is kind of refreshing in that I can do what I want, you know. If this works, I will use it, and I can put a person here, I can move him about, which you can't do if I'm photographing reportage. And so this is sort of refreshing for me, in that I can play with it as much as I want, manipulate it, make this scene perfect. And that's what I try to do, because you don't have that freedom. Otherwise, in reportage, you don't have that freedom.
Is there any particular image that you think particularly represents the experience of urban displacement and forced migration, the many you've showed us?
I think there's no one single image that represents urban displacement. There is certain images that represent it well, like the picture of the girl and her child in Haiti overlooking Port-au-Prince. I mean, it represents the vulnerabilities that women face. The man on the rooftop in Kuala Lumpur, I think, really represents how hidden they are. That anonymity of living in a city, as a refugee coming to these places, which are huge, and some of these are mega cities, and you have to go there, and how small you are, and how small you must feel, and how vulnerable you are. All that, I hope, is reflected in a picture like that. Otherwise, they each sort of say something to me. I mean, the woman standing in the street in Nairobi and the fire is burning behind her. I mean, it's like a vision from hell, you know. It's such a bleak place to live, but this is where people have to try and fend for themselves and try and survive. And so I hope they all sort of reflect that resilience that is in these people. You know, they've incredible resilience and have had to accept sort of the unacceptable, but that will to survive is so strong. And so they need more protection and more respect rather than the discrimination and sort of the reality that they face. And so I hope that comes through in them all.
Very powerfully, I'd say. Well, there's a question at the back first, and then I'll give you the floor again.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on something that Sarah mentioned earlier, which is around the point that many refugees, I mean, having, like Sarah, lived and worked in East Africa for many, many years, and knowing many refugees from different countries in the area, while all the points you make are valid and the photographs are beautiful and they do bring out the sort of feelings that you're trying to convey, there are many refugees who have many capacities. And one of the stereotypes about people who move to other countries and who are there are that they are needy and that they're somehow less than human for that reason. And so highlighting the fact that refugees actually bring something to a country, which is what the research within HPG has indicated, is also important. And so in manipulating the images and the message you're trying to convey, there's a danger of losing that dimension. And so maybe in the work that you're going to do in the future in the UK, it's something to consider. I mean, it's difficult to find those people because those people who are successful in reintegrating and who manage to make a go of it are not invisible anymore, or they're not visible in the way that refugees are. So it's a different sort of invisibility. Anyway, thanks.
Right, and it probably needs another project, and it would be a good project, and it'd be one that I would be happy to do. But you have a valid point. Some of these people were successful. Some of them were doing well for themselves, and I hope that comes through in the story. That was my hope, that element would come through in the stories of some of those people, like the young man who's teaching now. But I think in terms of this project, the message was really that these people are forgotten, that they are suffering. And my experience was the majority of people I found were in that situation. When I found someone who was successful, I didn't avoid them. I mean, I wanted to show that. I really wanted to cover all facets of it. But this was my experience. The vast majority of the people I met were in difficult situations. I mean, were living in poor circumstances. Iraqis in Jordan, we tried to meet some Iraqis in Jordan, and my fixer was all, but you know, they live in big houses here. They're very rich. They have lots of money. I said, that's okay. You know, let's go and meet them in their big house. And in the end, a particular family fell through. So, not that the style could have worked. It might have looked a little odd, but it is something. It is an important element, yes, and it's not really a part of this project. This project is aimed in a different sort of direction, but it's a valid point, yes.
Thank you.
I had two really small comments. The first is you've uttered the fatal words that it's 90% complete. And I guess lots of people have lots of ideas of what you could do for that extra 10%. But the one thing that struck me, so here's my idea, was so many of the faces and the people we've seen are obviously Asian or African, and yet there are so many European descent refugees, especially in Eastern Europe and former Soviet Union.
Yes.
And just thinking about your project, I was just thinking, well, that's one thing that isn't really clearly depicted. So I don't know if there's any plans on that. And the second ironic comment was the Paddington Station exhibition, considering all the news coverage there's been in the past on refugees using Eurostar or illegal migrants and so forth. But I think having an exhibition at a transport hub is a great idea at airports, because ultimately refugees is all about travel and displacement and that journey in itself. So I think that's great.
No, it's a very valid point, and it's something we're really trying to do. Actually, that's from the start. I wanted that to photograph a white refugee. We don't want to show that all of these refugees are African or Asian or Arab. This can happen to anybody, and that's something I really wanted to emphasize in the project. It's been difficult to find someone, and we're still trying to do that. But that's really the hope. So, like the other lady said, UK and someone, a white refugee, a European refugee, or from wherever, would add a really important element. You're right, and inshallah that will happen.
Any other comment? Otherwise, I'll give the floor to the lady at the front again.
Just one last question I was curious about. The images, of course, individually, aesthetically exquisite, and they could stand alone as a work of art. But what makes them so powerful for me is the narrative associated with it. And how are you going to be able to translate for people that are walking through a train station or an airport? They're beautiful pictures, and then they're asking questions, why is that picture there? How are you going to communicate the story?
Right. I mean, well, the plan is to put the text beside the picture. Quite simply. But we also, what I've done also is take little detail shots, which I haven't had time to show you tonight, but with each refugee I asked them, what is your most precious possession? For the most it was their documents, their UNHCR card, or some documentation that they had from home. These little scraps of paper that we'd have.
Family album?
Sometimes, yes. And so I photographed them, and those are little things that will stand alone, hopefully beside the text. And so all of this is to give just extra levels of understanding and just extra level depth to the whole piece. So the plan is, and we have some good designers, I think, working on this exhibition, I hope, and we're going to have the main picture quite big, but the testimony beside it, and then some little detailed shots, and some sort of big branding with maybe quotes from individual refugees about their experiences, and that will lead the viewer through the whole exhibition. And so hopefully it'll be quite coherent, and it'll work together as a body, That's the hope.
Got time for one last question or comment? Gentleman at the back.
Well, I just wanted to ask how it was as an experience for you going to these places and actually meeting with these people. You touched briefly on when you were in Nairobi, you drew a crowd. How did that sort of happen, and how was it for you? Were you persecuted yourself when doing this? Were you suffering from the authorities, and were people wanting to hear what you had to say?
I was detained 3 times. So I felt on the same level. I could relate to the refugees. In Jordan, we were taken in by the authorities, but they told us it was for our own protection because I was filming in the street at the time, doing some video, and a huge crowd gathered, 20, 30 people, and they started to get angry, and it turned out they were traders going to Syria, and they thought I was filming them, and so that was fine. Bujumbura, for a few minutes, they wanted to see papers. Nairobi was the worst. Nairobi, we were actually taken off the street and held for like 3 hours, and the chief down in the station was so blatantly corrupt. He just said, "This is going to be very expensive for you." It was the first thing he said to me, and he quite openly wanted money, but we just sat tight, not getting anything, and he let us go. It was a late night though. So in Asia it was fine. No one passed any remarks. Cameras are quite open. New York was fine. Haiti, Port-au-Prince is difficult. I couldn't go outside without 2 4-wheel drives. They were quite strict on security, but no problems. So it was all really interesting, each place.
Andrew, thank you so much for really taking us through, I think, a journey with you and sharing your experience of spending time with these people, trying to represent their experience, trying to show what they've gone through, where they are today, what their aspirations, their hopes are. I think this project really is one of the many tools we have to bring out the difficult experiences that these people live on a daily basis, and will continue to live, unfortunately. And I think we're all looking forward to seeing this in St. Pancras Station. We'll, tell others about it when it comes up in January. But well done. It's been really a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much.